Hey everybody, KC here. So I've always said that one of the great pleasures of my career has been just meeting and getting to know some fascinating people, people I never would have had access to otherwise. One of those people is a fellow named Mark Ciccone. Now, Mark spent more than 3 decades at Procter Gamble. He's incredibly smart about the industry. And I got to know him a little bit when we were doing the Retail Tomorrow project that GMDC was involved with for a time. And Mark has just written a new book, and it's called Obelisk Odyssey: 26 Ancient Monoliths, Four Continents, and One Man's Monumental Search for Meaning. And I had to be honest. I have to be honest with you. I wasn't even quite sure what an obelisk was before I read the book, and I talked to Mark. And but it's really interesting. The book is part travel book, part history book, and part sort of a meditation, if you will, on things like permanence and the transitory nature of many, many different things. So I decided I wanted to do a little talk with him on Morning Newsbeat. And I found it really, really interesting. We talked about a lot of different stuff. A lot of it was business related, but not everything. We even got a little movie talk into there about Casablanca. Anyway, I really recommend the book Obelisk Odyssey by Mark Ciccone. I will put a link at the bottom so you can pick it up from Amazon.com. And I really hope you enjoy my conversation with Mark Ciccone. Mark Ciccone, welcome to Morning Newsbeat. I'm so excited about the book and then your willingness to talk about it here on Morning Newsbeat.
Well, Kevin, thanks so much for having me. This is going to be fun.
It is terrific. I'm going to hold this up a lot because I think people should go buy it. So, Obelisk Odyssey. I'm assuming you named it that because you didn't want to call it Indiana Ciccone and the Obelisk Odyssey. But talk a little bit. First, let's start here. What exactly is an obelisk for people who don't know?
Well, first of all, before you go on, it's interesting you say Indiana Jones because the first cover we had designed with the publisher had kind of suitcases in the sand, and it looked very Indiana Jones-ish, and I liked it. And we did a little focus group, and people said, this other one works a little better. But that's a good insight.
You could have had a hat, a leather jacket. It would have been great.
Hey, man, that's good. We probably would have to go through copyright stuff, et cetera. So it's better this way. What's an obelisk? And I get that asked a lot. Yeah. And an obelisk in a generic sense it's a stone pillar that is a square at the bottom, at the base. It tapers to the top, and it ends in a point. And it's usually a monument or a landmark. That's the generic definition. What this book is about are the very first obelisks and the most famous ones, which is a subset of that, which are Egyptian obelisks, which there are only 26 in the world. And here's what they look like. Picture's worth 1,000 words. This is the one in Paris. It's one of the best preserved ones. Mm-hmm. They had an Olympic event there, by the way, a few months ago. They had 3-man basketball and breakdancing was set up right in front of this obelisk. Snoop Dogg was there, and he did a little shtick, etc.
But that's it. That's important. While there are 26 Egyptian obelisks, but not all 26 are in Egypt anymore.
Exactly. 11 are in Egypt, and 15 are outside of Egypt. And that's what the book is about. It's about me visiting these 26 obelisks and reflecting on where they stand in their current environments. Yeah, the past is interesting. How they got there is interesting. But they're really relevant in today's society. Right. And these are the oldest man-made structures standing in public spaces in the world. They go back almost 4,000 years.
I mean, you were writing about one in New York Central Park, and which I think I've probably passed, I don't know, hundreds of times. And I never gave it any thought. I never thought about its origin, about what it meant or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, me too. I lived in New York City for a number of years, went to Central Park a lot, and just went by it and never thought twice about it. But if you are really looking at it now that if you have some background, right, you see the sweep of history. You see the skyscrapers in the background. You see the skinny skyscrapers that just went up on Central Park South they look like obelisks. And you say to yourself, did the same people, the same human species create these obelisks 2,000 years before Christ and these skinny skyscrapers on Billionaires Row? It makes you reflect on the passage of time, both historical and personal, and that's what got me juiced up.
It's funny you say that because when I hate those skinny skyscrapers. I just, and I largely hate them because they always strike me as rich people's monument to themselves.
Oh yeah.
And that they have very little. The point is not to fit into a neighborhood, and it is not to be neighborly, but rather to let people know exactly how much money you are and how much above them you stand.
Yeah, I mean, this is the last picture I'm going to show, and I wasn't even planning to show, but since you mentioned it, this is the obelisk in Central Park, right, surrounded by these skyscrapers. And this one over here is the skinny skyscraper. I don't know if you can get a really
we got it. We got
good look at it. That is the fourth largest building in North America, and it's all condos. I mean, there's no workspace in there. It's all 46 condos of the fourth largest building in North America. So I think it buttresses your point that this is all about me, and it's not anything useful other than for those 46 people.
When the obelisks were originally being built in Egypt, were they built as, explain why they were built? Were they also built as sort of people's monuments to themselves?
They were. Yes, they were built. The pharaohs are the ones that had them built, excavated out of a granite quarry in southern Egypt, and it was dedicated primarily to the sun god Ra. It was supposed to be, that was their most important god, also called Amon-Ra. And if you're an NFL fan, by the way, the great wide receiver for the Detroit Lions, Amon-Ra St. Brown, was named after the Egyptian sun god. His father apparently had a great sense of history. So I just love this. I love that name. But it was dedicated to him, and it was really a form of worship, if you will. Right. But since the pharaoh is considered a deity, yeah, it was a lot about him. Although there was one her, which is another story we can get into some other time.
So, what prompted you on this journey? You call it an odyssey in the title, but you actually make the point in the book that this was a journey, this was not a trip, and you draw a distinction between those two words.
Yeah, and it started as a trip. That's what it was. I didn't set out to do kind of an odyssey. It just kind of happened organically, which are the best kinds of things, right, frankly, as you and I both agree. And I went to Egypt. I'd never been there. Have you ever been to Egypt, by the way?
I have not.
Although
I tell you, I want to go now.
You should. A lot of people are, skittish about it. It was fantastic. My wife was not interested. We've traveled a lot. She didn't have an interest. So I went with two of my buddies, and we were only there 8 or 9 days. And I kept tripping across, almost literally, these obelisks. We had a guide, and he would say, okay, here's a pyramid, and they blow you away. I mean, those are just fantastic. King Tut's tomb, fantastic. Oh, and by the way, there's an obelisk. We kept running across them, and after we hit the 9th or 10th one in 4 different cities, I said, man, these things are all over the place. They're distributed. And I put my business hat on for just a minute and a half. This is not a business book, but I put it on. I said, you know what? I think these are the world's first globally distributed products. They don't have a UPC code on it, but if you just look at how it happened, they were created, they were shipped in a very creative way, and they've ended up now, not just in Egypt, but all over the world. I said, you know what? That interests me. How did it happen that they ended up going all over the world, and why are they in modern societies, and what do they say? Do they have a voice anymore? And if it is, what is it? Kevin, I was at a point in my life where I was kind of reevaluating things. That's the other thing to say. And I was trying to make sense of what was going on in the world, as I think we all are. And I wanted to look backwards. Churchill has a great saying, the further we look back, the more we can look forward. And I've always felt that. I've always loved history. And I thought, what better way to look back than looking at the world's oldest publicly standing monuments and in modern context, and try to make a comparison, see what change is all about, at least in an impressionistic way. And that's kind of what drove me to it.
Yeah. Well, and listen, I'd be less than honest if I didn't say part of for me, what was so interesting about the book is we're not that different in age. You're a couple of years older than me, but not me.
I'm a couple of years older than everybody, but go ahead.
I keep saying that to a lot of people too. But I was fascinated by the idea that this was a transitional time for you. You were trying to figure out, you were really trying to figure out you were sort of looking back on the sweep of a career, and 32 years with Procter and Gamble, and you had done some consulting, and you and I got to know each other working together on the interestingly named Retail Tomorrow project GMDC had for a while. And but I was fascinated by this notion of, while looking backward at that, you were also trying to figure out what's your place in the future, which is, I think, when you get to be a certain age, I'm there too, you're trying to figure out how am I going to maintain my relevance?
Yeah, right? You're hitting exactly on the point. You know Pat Kiernan, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great guy. And he had a saying. He's a few years older than I am, and he said, "Mark, you're going to reach a point in time where you're going to have a couple choices. One is, your business career is going to largely be in the rearview mirror, and you can have fun, and that's great. You can play golf, and I'm a lousy golfer, but still I like to ski and kayaking. I have related activities. Or you can have purpose, and that is try to do something, kind of give back, try to be relevant, try to grow, et cetera, et cetera. But the real great thing is if you could do both, fun with a purpose. And that's really what I want to do. I want to do something that's meaningful. I want to have dialogue like this with people. I want to kick around ideas. I want to grow personally. But I also want to do it in a context where it's enjoyable. So it kind of married my two thoughts. My wife has a great saying. She says, "You're never too old to be what you might have been." And that's kind of where I'm at right now. So if you think you've stopped growing, that's not a good place to be. At least it's not for me. Yeah. And this is my way of addressing that.
No, listen, that really resonated in the book, certainly for me. So, but it's interesting too, because I mean, in so many ways. Well, let me ask you a quick question. Obelisks, the 26 that you're writing about, are they just the surviving obelisks of that time? Do we know? Yes. Were there 260 and only 10% of them survived, or do we have a sense of that?
We don't know exactly, but there were hundreds.
Right.
And it's just, they were created so long ago that they fell in wars or earthquakes, etc. They got fragmented, and there's only 26 left. And only 5 of them are still in their original location in Egypt. The other 21 have moved. But yes, there were many more.
There's the lesson for the guys in the skinny skyscrapers, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's important. So yep. It's also interesting because in some ways, obelisks, they sort of represent this focus on permanence, right? Even though only a few of them have survived. And that's interesting to me, because one of the themes of the book is permanence versus transitory, right? The whole notion of sometimes we think our priorities or our preconceptions are more permanent than life proves that they are. There's this line you had in the book. You referred at one point to the permanent versus the throwaway, the eternal versus the temporary. You said, "Today we live in real time," a phrase that's often tossed about in business. The ancient Egyptians just lived in time. And that's a great line. "I spent my whole career throwing around terminology meant to promote speed and efficiency. Phrases like just-in-time inventory, product life cycle, consumer demand, and global sourcing. The Egyptians wouldn't have understood any of that."
Yeah, let me answer it in a couple different ways. And let's look at the Egyptians first. They didn't build much, but everything they built, they wanted to last forever. Mm-hmm. And when you think about it, the pyramids, not the obelisks, were built in 2800 BC. They were the largest buildings in the world for 4,000 years, until 1200, when the old St. Paul's Cathedral steeple went 3 feet higher, and that burned down, and that we've had a whole stream of tallest buildings in the world ever since then. But 4,000 years that nothing was taller than 480 feet, which were the pyramids. There was no change in the life of the Egyptians. They just lived for something that they tried to create something that they thought would outlast them. They mummified their bodies. They wanted their bodies to live forever. Where are we today? Obviously, everybody talks about change and fast pace of change, but you're right. I don't think we realize it. I had a really interesting experience and a sad one. My mother-in-law just passed away 4 weeks ago.
Sorry.
And yeah, 99 years old, had a great life. Oof. And what we're experiencing now is all the stuff she left behind. And for the last couple of years, she knew that she wouldn't last forever, and she was trying to give it away, and people just didn't want it. And it broke her heart and made us sad too. We took some stuff, we really didn't want it. But there's all kinds of stuff left over. Dining room tables that are out of date, Broadway playbills of shows that you'll never hear of again.
Oh, I have a box of playbills sitting someplace. I can totally relate to that.
Best-selling books that you never will read again because they were the fad of a moment, etc. And they say there's 4 phases of getting rid of our stuff, and you may have heard it. One is the first stage is you try to give it to the family. The second stage is to try to give it to friends. The third is you try to have an estate sale, and the fourth stage is 1-800-GOT-JUNK. And 99% of what is in my mother-in-law's house that she thought was so meaningful at the time that would outlive her for years and years is going to go to 1-800-GOT-JUNK. And it's going to be the same with my stuff too. So all of those things, you think about it, it's just of a moment. And I'll tell you why I think it is, unless you want to add something.
Keep going.
I think a lot of it is we overrate a lot our what we have. We overrate its importance, and a lot of it has to do with we just only focus on the moment. We can't see it in a wider context. And I just wrote down a few examples of why about just how transitory things are, and we don't realize it in a minute. One is you can't watch news anymore without it saying breaking news. Breaking news, whether it's on TV or it's on online. There's no news anymore. It's all breaking news. It's all
I'm in the news business. That makes me nuts.
Yes. Teaching. I had a chance to teach college students in Rome for 2 semesters, 2 full semesters, business students. And because I'm not an academic, the real pros said, you know what? You got to change something every 6 minutes now with a class. It's been determined that's their attention. I know you teach too. There's 6 minutes. That's it. You've got to throw in something. You've got to have a fire drill. You've got to call on somebody to the blackboard, et cetera, et cetera. Movies. I know you love movies. I know you've written books on movies. Movies today drive me crazy. A scene cannot last for more than 2 minutes. It just can't, because people lose interest. And a lot of it is bouncing back and forth in time for no reason at all. It's just trying to change the look of it because people get bored after 2 minutes. And so, I'm not.
It's funny you say that, because I know you love film noir.
Yeah.
Right? And film noir, it requires your attention because they build suspense over long periods of time.
Yeah, exactly. I'll throw out another one. I don't want to go down the movie rattle too deep, but I know you like movies. Casablanca, a great movie. Everybody knows it. And when that movie was made the way it is now, you got 15 minutes up front of Humphrey Bogart and Rick's Cafe, and there's a lot of, you're meeting all these interesting characters, and they're talking about the war. And then Ingrid Bergman walks in, and the screen gets fuzzy, and there's 15 minutes of backstory. Play it again, Sam. They cut away to Paris 2 years earlier before the Nazis, and it's Ingrid Bergman and Humphrey Bogart. Then it cuts back, the screen gets fuzzy, and it goes back to real time for the rest of the movie. If that movie were made today, the 15 minutes in Paris that comes in the middle of it, it would be chopped up into 15 one-minute segments or 30-second segments, and it would be spurred in with jump cuts, etc., because that's the way people want stories to be told. I think they wanted to be told that way. They don't. That doesn't speak to me. I like a lot of that stuff too.
But Timothy Chalamet would be playing Rick Blaine, but I don't want to think about that. Right?
Okay, there you go.
Okay, so let's bring it back a little bit to business.
Yeah.
Which is that, right now, one of, the hot companies are companies like Temu and Shein, which, these fast fashion companies, right? They've really an interesting supply chain model in that, in fact, they don't really even own any factories. It's all about movement. Amazon wants to emulate them, and this is all throwaway fashion. The idea is you spend, $5 on a sweater, maybe you wear it twice and then you throw it out. And it's like, there's no sense of the idea that no, you spend maybe a little bit more money on something that lasts,
Right.
and that has value as opposed to price. I mean, again, to bring it back to the industry that we've both spent so much time in, the people equate price and value, and they're not the same thing.
Yeah. So you're making a great point, and it's not just you're making. I can't give better examples than you gave in terms of fast fashion, et cetera, et cetera. But let me add taking existing products and upgrading them.
Right.
That's part of the revenue stream. You got to have planned obsolescence to some degree, right? Particularly in technology. You've got to, the Egyptians never would have understood the concept of repurchase, so right. you had what you had. But in order to keep the ship afloat, if you're a corporation, you've got to have something new every year. And I get that, believe me, and I think that's a good idea. But so much of these upgrades are just cosmetic. I mean, they're not really upgrades. It could be a repackaging just to get somebody's attention. I'll give you an example. It's not a CPG, but my wife has a car. She loves Subarus, and they're nothing fancy. They're very functional. They're safe, etc. That's why she buys them. The new Subaru has so many bells and whistles that weren't needed. I mean, this isn't like, starting your car remotely or self-driving, etc. It's the radio looks different. The defroster goes on a little bit differently, etc. She's had this car 2 years and she doesn't know how to use her radio. I mean, she says, look, I want this car to do 6 things, and here's what I want it to do. And she can't figure it out. So and you talk to the Subaru people and they say, you know what? We like our 2012 model the best. They don't buy the new ones either. And it's true with iPhones too. A lot of the people in the Apple stores will say, no, I like the iPhone 9 the best. These other ones, yada, yada. So it's a planned obsolescence, and I understand the reason for it. And change and innovation is fantastic. Sure. Believe me, we've lived that life, and I'm not walking away from them at all. But a lot of it plays on the notion of fear of missing out. And companies understand that. They say, oh my, if we come out with something new and we call it new, then there's going to be this, particularly with the younger people, I've got to have this because I've got to have it. And the older I get, and I'm still curious about fear of missing out, but I have something that I call fear of opting in. And it's, my acronym for that is FOOI, fear of opting in, FOOI. And that is when I'm being told that something is better when it's really not or new, and then I get suckered into it and I make a mistake. I make a lot of mistakes with books these days, by the way, Kevin, particularly fiction. I used to read a lot of fiction, but I read the reviews and blah, blah. I say, I got to get this. This is a good seller, etc. And I give up halfway through. I don't know the last time I really finished a novel, and I turn more to nonfiction now. So, again, everything is relevant. There's good examples and bad. You've got to keep innovation going and improvement, but not everything that's new is innovative or worth the time and energy.
Yeah. And listen, I don't really like the conversation. We're wandering a little far afield from the Obelisk thing, but it's interesting. Before I bring it back, one of the things I'm very conscious of as I get older is I feel much the same way as you do, but I also try to caution myself, don't be a grumpy old man, right?
Yeah.
Because because I feel that sometimes it's like, oh man, I like it this way, and it's like, well, slow down, man.
Yeah.
Slow roll. Just because that's the way you feel doesn't mean that it's relevant to everybody else. But let's go back. It's interesting. One of the things I loved about the book, you made this, you drew this conclusion in the book, and basically it grew out of your preoccupation with the obelisks and learning about their history and stuff. And one of the things you said, and I love this line, almost all of human history is populated by nameless, faceless people. And including obviously the people who not the people who necessarily commissioned the obelisks, but the people who actually made the obelisks. And I think that's a really great lesson that leaders in any organization need to think about, which is, you may have the title, but the real work is being done on the front lines by these nameless, faceless people who do the work and don't often get the credit.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of my big takeaways in all this. And I think it's a lesson in humility for leaders. Um, and the Romans used to have a practice when a general came back from conquering some foreign land, and they would go right down the sacred way, right down by the forum, with the animals in front of them, the elephants, and all the cheering crowds. There would be someone right next to him that was put there and would whisper in his ear, "All fame is fleeting. All fame is fleeting." And it always stuck with me. And George Patton loved that quote as well. It was a reminder for him too. And it really is. I mean, most of the people that we think are so famous, people are going to forget them, etc. But what they leave behind in terms of institutions or things that they create, that will be their legacy, not their own individual thing. And all you need to do is fun to look at books like In Search of Excellence and Good to Great, which were great books, and I loved them. I ate them up and got lessons from them. But very few of those companies that were touted as being great back then, they're not even in business anymore, let alone many of them not being great. So it's a lesson that there's a cycle to these things. It's inevitable death and rebirth, and it's always going to be that way. We've been doing this a long time as a species, and companies are human creations, and that it's going to keep going that way.
Yeah, it was sort of sobering. One of your other conclusions was, and I found this a little depressing, that human nature has not changed over the course of history. The population of every civilization has been tribal. I'm not sure that's a good thing because it suggests we're not really learning.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that came out of this book. And obviously we talk a lot about that today, not just here in the U.S., but throughout the world. And as I've traveled, I mean, every country is tribal. Every society is, at least the ones that I've seen, and they have been throughout history. And it's caused a lot of issues, whether it be religion or race or ethnicity or class or whatever. It's there, generation after generation after generation. And, you really wonder. I mean, there's the saying, it's been attributed to a number of people: those that don't pay attention to history, the lessons of history, were destined to repeat it. And I'm not sure that it's ever going to change. I mean, you have people that are great historians that will look at the same facts and they'll interpret them differently because of the lens that they're looking through them. They try to be objectives, and some are, but many aren't. The very best line I've seen in all this, and the most hopeful one to me, it comes from another movie. Did you see The Holdovers with Paul Giamatti?
Oh, love that movie. One of my favorite movies last year.
Yeah, me too. And for those that didn't see it, he's great always, Paul Giamatti. But he's a teacher of ancient history in a New England prep school, and these kids have little use for what he's teaching. And at one point he says, and he has a drink in his hand because he's got his own issues. He says, history isn't about studying the past. It's about explaining the present. And that's what I think is, for me, the hope. It's an explanation of the present. It's not necessarily a lesson that people are going to learn, although I hope we do learn some things. I really hope we do learn. But at least by understanding where we've come from and why people have different opinions on things and the facts that they're choosing, at least it leads to understanding. And I think that's the most that we can hope for sure, is that people at least understand by studying history where they're coming from as a tribe, depending on how you define that. Yes, I'd love to say, hey, we're going to learn the lessons, but maybe some future generation will be smarter than everybody else has been up to this point.
So you said in the book that one of the reasons you sort of took on this odyssey was you had a sort of a sense of unfinished business. So, but I'm curious, what's the next odyssey? Do you have other unfinished business that you want to address?
Yeah, well, the unfinished business is, again, it's fun with a purpose. And I guess the purpose part is understanding myself a little bit better, trying to understand what I can do to contribute in the future. And So that would lead me to more Odysseys, and the personal element is a part of it. At first, I thought I would take up where I left off with another Odyssey I did, which was on the Silk Road, which is fantastic. I only did a small portion of it in Uzbekistan, which is the best part of it. People say who've done more of it. It's where the East meets the West, with the Marco Polo route. It's I find the East meeting the West to be fascinating. So maybe that's something I want to understand a little bit better. The other one will be I'm kind of halfway through this, and it won't take the form of an Odyssey, but it'll be another book, and it'll be about Eastern Europe. I'm very interested in that for a lot of reasons. Although my name is Italian and I speak Italian and I've lived in Italy for a number of times and years, I'm half Hungarian, and I've gotten into understanding what's happened in Eastern Europe and Yugoslavia and all of the tribal war stuff that's happened there over the years, all the various ethnicities and the squabbling and worse that continues to go on there. So I'm doing a series of trips there. I'm going to learn more about it, and I'm going to write a novel that's more of a mystery, if you will. I hope it's entertaining. It's not. I don't like books that lecture at you, etc. But that's some unfinished business for me to try to understand that and to try to make sense of it for some personal reasons.
Well, Mark, you are always welcome to come back on Morning Newsbeat and talk about these things, because it's fascinating. For people who are not familiar, I mean, I used to write about it a lot on Morning Newsbeat, was the whole Retail Tomorrow project was an Odyssey of its own kind.
Yeah, absolutely.
To try and understand what were the options that were open to retailers and vendors as they figured out what was the best way to innovate in ways that were both relevant and resonant to their shoppers. This book is terrific. I recommend it highly. I'll put a link to Amazon on the site, because it is part history book, it is part travel book, but it's also part kind of personal exploration in ways that I think are highly relevant to a lot of the issues that we face as a culture and that the business faces. And it's terrific. And I thank you so much for coming on Morning Newsbeat to talk about it.
Thank you so much, Kevin, and best to all your viewers.
Anytime. Thanks. Take care, everybody. See you next time.
Bye-bye.